This tutorial is meant to orient you to the student supplement for the second edition of the SBL Handbook of Style. Because the SBL Handbook of Style is such a large book that has a lot of information that is not directly applicable to the work that students do in undergraduate education, some professors came up with this supplement that focuses on the kinds of things that students regularly encounter. So in some ways it repeats information that's already in the SBL Handbook in a condensed and more accessible form, but it also goes into detail about things that the SBL Handbook does not cover. Specifically, it will talk about what a paper should look like when it is properly formatted, something that's not directly addressed in the handbook. So it's a really helpful and useful tool for students. I just want to highlight a couple of things. As usual, the table of contents is your best friend here. You can tell this is divided up into three basic parts. The first part will talk about just some things like biblical citations, a more detailed discussion of citing biblical commentaries, how to handle abbreviations. So it has some more detailed descriptions about things that students address or encounter fairly regularly. But really the most helpful parts are the examples of what a term paper should look like. And so part 2 describes the rules for the various parts of formatting a paper, such as what margin should you use, what kind of spacing, what kind of heading should you use, all those kinds of questions. And then in part 3, it'll actually show you samples of what that will look like in a term paper. So I want to highlight a couple of things as we're looking through. In general, this is a short enough document that I would encourage any student to just read through the entire thing, maybe as you're preparing to write a paper, and that way you're ready for what you need to do. Let me highlight the section on biblical citations. This talks about how to properly cite the biblical text in your writing, gives you an example of what a proper parenthetical citation should look like at the end of a sentence, but then helpfully it also talks about some of the exceptions to the rule of when you abbreviate the book. So, for example, at the beginning of a sentence, you write out the entire book rather than abbreviating it. Right? Or when you're referring to the book as a whole, you write it out rather than abbreviating it. So it offers some helpful tips there that will orient you as you're doing your writing and referring to the biblical text. This gives some examples of down here. What it should look like when you put it into your writing. So again, you're not going to write everything out. You're going to use the numbers to indicate the citation. And then one minor detail, it does highlight that you should use an in dash rather than a hyphen when you are showing the verse numbers, the inclusive verse numbers. That's getting pretty nitpicky, but it's also something that you can learn how to do quickly and do it properly, and just makes a difference in your writing. It also then shows you how to compile lists if you're going to have lists of scriptures. So that's a helpful condensation of what you're going to find in the SBL Handbook. And there will be places where they will point you to the SBL Handbook for the fuller description of what they're highlighting. The next section in this particular supplement will then talk about biblical commentaries. They go into a little bit more detail on biblical commentaries here and offer more explanation than you find in the SBL Handbook, so it can be very helpful. Same thing for the next section that talks about dictionaries, right? So you got a long section showing different types of commentaries, then some discussion of dictionaries and encyclopedias, so really helpful there. I'll note one more thing before moving on to the examples, and that is they do clarify how to use abbreviations in your writing, specifically abbreviations for journals and book series, secondary resources. They're going to point you to the appropriate sections in the SBL Handbook of Style that lists all the acceptable abbreviations. And what they're going to tell you here is that if you find an abbreviation in the SBL Handbook, that's what you should use in your writing. Use that abbreviation both in your footnotes and in your bibliographies. If you are using a work that is not included in the list, right, this is important, then you just go ahead and write out that entire title of the journal or the series. Don't make up your own abbreviation. So if there's an abbreviation in the SBL Handbook, use it. If there's not, then write out the title of the journal or the series that you're citing. So again, those are some helpful things, orientations to the things that students often use. As I've said, though, I think one of the most helpful things about the student supplement is the lists or the instructions about how to properly format a term paper. So again, this part 2 goes through and writes out the rules for you about margins, spacing, pagination, all those kinds of things. So you can read through that and understand what the rules are. And then it's really helpful to skip to part 3 and actually see the examples. So you've got an example title page. Obviously, this material that's up here in the header would not be on your title page. That's kind of unfortunate to my mind that they left that here in the supplement, but other than deleting that, this shows you what it should look like, right? You'll have Abilene Christian University here, title of your paper, right? Submitted to whoever your professor is in fulfillment of your course, and then at the bottom your name. So that shows you what a properly formatted title page should look like. The next example is what a table of contents should look like. You probably won't be using that a whole lot in undergraduate work, but if you need it, there you go. And then it moves into what the actual rest of the paper should look like. So where does the heading fall on your first page, right? 2 inches down. You've got it double spaced, kind of shows you the spacing that you would offer between different sections, showing you that on the first page of your paper, the page number is going to go here on the bottom, and then every subsequent page is going to go up here in the upper right-hand corner. Again, showing you examples of what all the subheadings should look like when you use those, what a block quotation should look like. So really helpful to have this here. At the bottom, it shows you footnotes. Right? It shows you the proper indentation and spacing for footnotes at the bottom of the page. Again, I doubt you'll need the example in an appendix, but you have it here. And then it shows you what a bibliography should look like. So again, you've got the 2-inch margin at the top rather than the typical 1-inch margin. You start with bibliography centered in all caps, and then you obviously won't have this paragraph here. This is just a description to help you understand what follows. When you're doing your own bibliography, you'll just jump right into the sources, and it shows you again what the indentation should look like, the spacing, the arrangement, right there, alphabetical by author. So it's just helpful to have these as examples of what it should look like. So once again, the student supplement will go into more detail and highlight things from the SBL Handbook of Style that are specific to the work that students do in undergraduate courses. The big advantage and the thing that you'll probably use over and over again are the examples of what the various parts of a term paper should look like. Title page, a typical page of the paper, bibliography, those kind of things. So I encourage you to download this, keep it close at hand as you're doing your writing. I think you'll find it to be a very helpful source.